Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Training Industry Leader Talk, L&D's role in driving organizational change, sponsored by SweetRush, Leadership Progress Cycle by Niche Academy, ELB Learning, HSI, Atana, and Open Sesame. My name is Emma. I'm a marketing associate here at Training Industry, and I'm so excited to have you with us here today. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to go over to help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's program. Throughout today's event, please feel free to use the chat for comments and submit all your questions in the Q&A panel at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. All the questions will be addressed during the event or at the end of the program during our Q&A section. We would also love to hear about what you learned from today's event on social media, so please tag us and share your takeaways with your colleagues. At the end of your time with us, you'll notice a short survey will pop open in your browser, so please fill that out and share your thoughts on today's event. And as always, all of our sessions are recorded and will be archived on trainingindustry.com, and all of you will receive a follow-up email later today with the recordings and a link to all the on-demand sessions. If this is your first Training Industry event, we'd like to welcome you. Training Industry exists to make connections among learning and development professionals. We offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D through live events like today's Leader Talk, as well as through articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports. We have a podcast, and you can make Training Industry your go-to resource for learning solutions by visiting trainingindustry.com. Now, without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker for this session, Jared Oates. Jared is a co-founder of Niche Academy. Teaching and learning are the threads that connect all the pieces of his life, so creating a learning platform felt like a natural fit. His formal schooling ended with a master's in English rhetoric, and informal schooling began almost immediately as Jared became a self-taught software engineer and then an entrepreneur. People are his passion, and he believes leadership is the work that draws out their full potential. Jared, we're so excited to have you with us here today. And without any further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emma. There's nothing that can replace actually being in a room with people and being able to make eye contact, but I do want to be able to interact with those of you here in attendance as much as possible. So we're going to have the chat. I'm just delighted to see the variety of places that we have people from in the chat. If you open it up, you can see we here in North America, we are coast to coast and north to south. And we have from Abu Dhabi, someone joining us from South Africa, from Lima, Peru, and Memphis, Tennessee. So this is a fascinating, interesting group. I am delighted to be with you. I'm going to share my screen, and okay, there we go. So I will try and keep tabs on the chat as we go along, and I'll have a poll in just a minute. But if there are questions that come up as we go through, please put them in the Q&A, and Emma will help us at the end to sort through those and answer as many of them as we can. The topic is from avoidance to clarity, training leaders to address team conflict with confidence. And I begin with a confession that I am, by default, a conflict avoidant person. I would much rather feel like everyone's getting along and there's just harmony. But I've learned that conflict is inevitable. And it's actually necessary and can be a really good thing. The thing that makes the difference between having good conflict and bad conflict is whether leaders know how to manage it effectively. So I wanted to start with a poll. And let's see. I put a slide in here just to kind of highlight the poll. And I'd like you to rate on a scale from 1 to 5. How would you rate the conflict management skill level in your organization? So in a 1 is that most leaders are not skilled, and a 5 is most are masterful. And I'm just kind of curious to see. So we've got a lot of 3s. 3s are winning. That's about 50 Um, and a few feel like there are real issues. And um, and we have one response indicating, or a few responses actually, 6, indicating that most people are masterful. So that's a fantastic place to be in your organization. But it looks like for most of us, there's a lot of room for growth, that people need to be able to handle conflict better. So the next poll, then, that kind of establishes the urgency of the problem, the scope of what we're addressing. The next question is something about your beliefs on whether conflict management skill level depends on personality. And so I'm curious to see, just what do you think? Does it have a lot to do with personality? Is it somewhat correlated with personality? Is it independent of personality? So I hope you can see. I'm not sure if you all can see the results, but it looks like um, about 15% feel like it has a lot to do with personality. About 70% believe it's somewhat correlated with personality, and about 17% feel it's independent of personality.
Yeah, let me share these final results. There we go. Everyone should be able to see that.
Okay, fantastic. I appreciate you sharing that. So, and I'm getting there's some comments, this also fluctuates as new leaders join or are promoted to leadership roles. Yes, that's an essential part of what we're working with. Even if you have a good place in your organization, over time, if you want to maintain that, you have to provide training for people so that they know how to handle it. Well, I'm going to tip my hand a little bit, and I'm going to reveal an agenda I have. I would like, by the end of this, to persuade you that conflict management skill level is really independent of personality, that it can be. So most leaders, a majority, aren't good. They aren't trained at handling conflict. They either avoid it entirely or they handle it poorly. And if it's handled poorly, it leads to disengagement, it leads to frustration, sometimes turnover. And I want you to become convinced by the end of this that a person who maybe has a personality that is not naturally inclined toward handling conflict, someone maybe who is reserved or introverted, can in fact become good at it and confident with it. And by the same token, a person who may be outgoing and charismatic and is very comfortable with conflict can really botch a live conflict situation. So, what if leaders were trained to manage it effectively? Well, that's what we're here to discuss. There are things that you can do that help them become that way, become competent, even masterful at managing it. So, in the chat, I'm curious to know, what are some topics that seem to produce conflict where you work? So, okay, Valerie, I love your comment. You are proof that it's absolutely a learned skill. I love that. Um, Yes, and neurodivergence can play a role. That's a really good point. So, time, accountability, differences of opinion, lack of role clarity. Yes, lack of communication, budget issues. Oh, yeah. Performance management. Time again. Accountability. Yeah. So these are common themes I'm seeing. Unclear expectations, not knowing how to give feedback, which leads to someone not feeling supported, or how to adjust behavior that would dissolve a conflict. Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna dive into a specific example in just a minute. But before I do, I want to reemphasize something here, that healthy versus unhealthy conflict. What is that? So when I talk about healthy conflict, that is a debate about what is right. And that's important to have. In fact, I did a blog post not long ago that if you have boring meetings, that's a warning sign that you're not talking about the things that you need to be talking about. If there is no conflict, then people are not engaged. The differences in perspective and opinion are just not surfacing in a useful way. Unhealthy conflict is when it turns into a battle over who is right. It becomes a power struggle, it becomes political. So, that is one of the first things that you can teach people to understand is that there is healthy conflict and there is unhealthy conflict. And the tricky bit is that on the surface, they can look identical at first. But as we dive into it, I think it'll become clear how you can tell what's going on and how you can set up a team that is inclined towards healthy conflict as opposed to unhealthy conflict. So let's do let's do an example. I don't know how relevant this will feel to your situation, but let's suppose that we have two members of an organization who are in conflict. We have Marcus. And Marcus's perspective is that he's been observing how AI is changing things, and he feels like the organization needs to get ahead of the game and it needs to eliminate some of the low-level creative roles. He argues that that will create cost savings and a velocity increase by using AI to accomplish some of those same things. His argument is that this is not a competitive advantage. It's table stakes. All the competition is doing this. If we don't, we are going to get left behind. And then you have Danielle. Her argument is that we should go slow and let each individual team decide how they adopt AI and how it will help them. Her argument is that layoffs hurt morale, they hurt productivity and quality, and ultimately the customer experience. She feels like this AI thing is a bandwagon that we just don't need to jump onto. I don't know what conversations are happening around AI where you work, but this is something that I've encountered. So think about it for a moment. And in the chat, let me know, what do you think? Is this healthy conflict or unhealthy conflict? What's your sense? Most feel like this is sounding healthy. All right, yeah. What leads you to believe that? They have well-reasoned arguments. They have real things that they care about that that seem like they're connected to real business goals. This isn't just about, Danielle's influence versus Marcus's influence, though it could quickly become that if you're not careful. So give me some thoughts in the chat. They look angry at each other. Yes, that was intentional. um, in the chat, let me know, what would you do if you were a leader responsible for managing this conflict? What would be one of the first things that you try to do to address this conflict? What ideas do you have? Okay, ask them to provide data to support their stance. That's good. Testing. Find a commonality. Yes. Talk to staff. Maybe A/B test it. Okay. Well, what I want to present you with, these are fantastic ideas. I love the way people are thinking. Maybe they can both be true. Yes. Um, in fact, that is the most likely scenario. And so, what I want to give you is a framework, some core ideas, just a few simple things. In fact, I'm going to have three core things that I'll offer as ways that you can train staff to be able to handle complex, thorny, real situations like this one. So, just a quote to kind of keep this in mind. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means. The goal is not to create an organization in which there is no conflict. The goal is to create harmony and progress through healthy conflict. Okay? So here are three things that we're going to talk about. Three things you can train leaders to do to manage conflict effectively. The first step is to set shared goals. And this can be done collaboratively. In fact, it ought to be done collaboratively. And when you have two people who are in conflict, you can help as a leader to identify a shared goal that both are really working towards. And that provides a framework for them to be able to discuss their differences in perspective and to find a way forward together. The second step, the thing that you can train leaders to do, is to manage the emotional temperature. So there are ways in which temperature, the emotional context of a confrontation can get out of hand and it can become very destructive. So there are effective things you can do to manage that. And the third thing, leaders can learn how to guide the conversation. So let's talk about each of those. Okay. First is setting a common goal, aligning on something that you share as a purpose. One of the things that we talk about quite a bit in Leadership Progress Cycle, we spend the first 5 weeks of that training on setting goals. Because when you have goals that are clearly articulated for the organization and for individuals, and they're measurable. So, in other words, everyone knows what the shared goals are. Everyone knows what each individual contributor's personal goals are, and those goals are measurable. That is the single most powerful thing you can do to eliminate unhealthy conflict. It becomes clear then how everyone is contributing to something that's shared, and it creates a situation where you can reframe me versus you into us versus the problem. That's an essential mindset shift, and it's something that you can train leaders to do. So that's the first thing. The second thing, managing the emotional temperature. If you're in a situation where conflict is getting heated, you can defer the conversation. You don't have to make a decision right then in most cases. And so you can say, okay, let's set this aside, let's think about it a bit. And in doing that, it's important not to chastise or to call out people who are becoming a little heated, but to rather validate the perspectives. And what your goal is with managing the temperature is to create a safe space, a space where people can be authentically who they are, they can have their perspective, and you can value that, and that allows a basis for a productive conversation later down the road. Okay, and then in that later conversation, you can teach leaders how to guide those conversations. And there are basic skills like active listening. This involves things like maintaining eye contact, summarizing key points. It involves body language. There are a lot of indicators that active listening is going on. And that is something you can learn how to do. You can also separate positions from interests, meaning people can get stuck on their position, what they want. But an effective leader can help uncover the why behind the position. And that's often something that's shared. So in our example, why does Marcus want AI? Well, it ultimately leads back towards the effectiveness and longevity of the organization. And why does um, Danielle want to go slow on it? Well, it is about the effectiveness and longevity of the organization. There's a shared goal there, and both have valid perspectives to bring. So separating positions from interests is a skill. It's something you can learn how to do. When you approach a conflict with that mindset, you can have a level of confidence that you can find a way out of it. It's not just something that makes you feel panicked and afraid and makes you shut down, which is something that I have to admit I've done sometimes. I just want to get out of the situation rather than to deal with it effectively. Um, Oh, and there's important comments from Sunil, about an awareness of emotional intelligence makes a lot of a difference to handle such situations. Yeah, that's one of those things that can help a lot with learning how to do active listening, for example. Excellent. Oh yeah, I haven't read Liz Wiseman's book Multipliers yet, but I'm glad you brought that up. That's something that I would really want to read as well. But she talks about debate and having people try arguing in favor of the opposite opinion to help them approach the conflict from the other perspective. That's a great technique as well, a great way to guide the conversation. All right, so let's talk about some mechanics of those conversations. Setting meetings and ground rules. Scheduling it at an appropriate time makes a big difference. Ground rules can be things like we are going to agree not to use sarcasm. We're going to agree to use I statements. So for those not familiar with that term, I statements are where you begin from your own located perspective and you acknowledge that. I feel, I believe, I think, I would like, as opposed to leading with you, because you tends to be accusatory. And in some cases, you're going to need to allow people to to speak their mind freely by ensuring that things will stay within that meeting, ensuring confidentiality. Those are some basics for setting a context where you can manage a conflict and turn it to advantage effectively. A couple of caveats here. Um, Leaders need to know when it's appropriate and necessary to bring in either someone from human resources or a mediator. Situations where that becomes necessary is where a conflict is long-standing, it's ongoing, and it has become personal, where it's slipping out of that realm of what's right for our organization, what are our shared goals, into that person is just someone I can't deal with. Another situation where a mediator might be important is if there's a power imbalance or if there is a potential legal risk. In the chat, share, if you would. A lot of good context here. Yeah. Okay, yeah. I won't read through all the comments, but in the chat, if you would, please share some examples you're aware of where there might be legal risk. What are some situations where legal risk might be something you need to consider? Give you a minute to think about that. Harassment, discrimination, yes, yes. When an employee feels targeted, yes, good point. When people are perceiving discrimination, yep. So people in a protected class, according to the law, feel like that status in the protected class is the reason behind the the conflict that they're experiencing. Hostile workplace, he said, she said arguments. Okay. Also, ethical things. If there is a question of whether someone is doing something that is unethical or illegal, that something to consider as well. Okay. What do we mean by a power imbalance? Let's talk about that a little bit. Oh, and the verbal and physical aggression, I'm going to talk about that in just a second. So what are some situations where there might be a power imbalance? What do you understand by that phrase? Supervisor to direct reports. Okay, so the conflict is between a supervisor and direct reports. Yes. Yeah. It can also be indirect. So someone who has a position, maybe it's not a direct reporting, but someone who is in a higher position or has more status within the organization than someone else. In order to get a fair and lasting uh, forward direction, in some cases you might need to have a mediator, someone who can step in and arbitrate. Managers versus managers, yes. Okay. So those are things that leaders need to be aware of. And to follow on to some things that have been shared here, managers and leaders need to understand that conflict resolution doesn't work in cases of bullying or harassment, and that legal protections take priority. So if there is a situation where there is sexual harassment going on, the goal is not to get people just to get along and brush it under the rug. That needs to be addressed. It's something that is not acceptable, and you have to be able to deal with that. And that can be a very difficult situation. So understanding that that conflict resolution, these techniques we're talking about, are not a panacea, and there are situations where trying to get people to find a common objective is not necessarily the right approach because um, there is something deeper and fundamentally unhealthy going on. So be aware of that, and helping leaders to understand those caveats are essential. But outside of those extreme situations, there, in most cases, when you follow these steps, when you keep in mind just those three things we've talked about, you can then develop a plan. And like some of you were suggesting at the outset, maybe we need to A/B test this with something that is unknown and new and uncertain. That would be a great way to allow both sides to feel like they're heard and understood. So in that meeting, as a result of that meeting where you're resolving a conflict, you can agree what actions you're going to take. And it matters a whole lot that there be actual assigned responsibility and follow-up, because it's tempting sometimes just to kind of bring the temperature down and call it a win, but not really follow through. That actually creates more mistrust down the road than not dealing with it at all. That's an example of a botched resolution. So even if you follow the steps and then you don't actually act on it, that destroys trust. That creates a tax, a burden on the organization. So that's the last piece of training leaders to be able to manage conflict effectively. It's not comprehensive, but those are some essentials that you as a learning leader can help instill in an organization. You can provide training so that people know how to do these things, and suddenly they become confident managers of conflict. So, big takeaways. Conflict is normal, and what makes the difference between good, healthy conflict and unhealthy conflict is training. It's the training that you provide. And great leaders learn how to turn tension into growth. In fact, they know that without tension, you can't have growth. You can't really make progress unless there is a balance and a struggle between competing ideas. Um, that's how we learn. It just seems to be the nature of the world we live in. And the right training can build that confidence in those leaders. So, some comments. The issue is how to get buy-in from the leaders that they need the training in the first place. Yes. So I would be interested in your comments on that as well. What works for you in framing this kind of training in a way that resonates with people within the organization? Any thoughts that you have on that? Convince them that it's their idea. Okay. Data and employee goals. Yes. If you can frame it in the critical path of the goals that those individual leaders have, if you can understand what they feel like they're trying to accomplish, and you can frame this kind of training as critical path to get there, it really, in the end, is a marketing exercise. It's an internal marketing exercise. It's a process of understanding your customer, understanding who they are, what they really want, and then framing the training in a way that resonates with what they want. Having a champion. Ooh, yes. Okay, describe the impact of outcomes for the organization. Yes. Access and train on emotional intelligence. Yeah. Meeting with each leader individually. Yes. The relationship is critical. That's where you get real traction. Um, invite them to take it. Yes. I start with a question about Valerie, yeah, about what's working and what's not. Often with guided questions, you can get them there. Yeah. Motivational interviewing skills come in handy for helping to increase the importance and confidence people place on a topic in authentic ways. Okay, wonderful. Well, I hope you're able to connect with each other more. Um, Let me share my contact information. Um, So my email address is nicheacademy.com, jared@nicheacademy.com. Niche Academy is the technology and the company that powers Leadership Progress Cycle. So conflict resolution is just one of the essential skills that are part of the Leadership Progress Cycle program. It's a 12-week coach-led experience, and you can learn more at leadershipprogresscycle.com. Any questions that you have for me?
I've got a couple in the Q&A panel. I'll read off to you, and
Awesome.
any other attendees, if you have questions for Jared, click that Q&A button in the bottom of your toolbar and type them there, and we'll get them answered. Okay, the first one, a lot of us feel uncomfortable inviting disagreement, especially when things already seem smooth. Can you share a practical example of how you help new leaders get comfortable embracing conflict in their teams?
Yes. Um, in almost every organization I'm aware of, there are unanswered questions, and there are multiple ways that you could address things. So the AI example I used earlier is one of that, but there are always different approaches. And sometimes it's specific to an organization, like, in a sales organization or um, in a development organization. But the practical example that I would offer is just finding something that matters to the leader of the organization, and then poking a little bit at, the approach that we're taking, and trying to find out if there might be other ways that that would accomplish that would get us to the end goal faster. In every organization that I'm aware of, there are different ways of looking at things. And I think when you call that out, it's easier for people to see that, if we're not having a robust conversation about this, what it means is that people are not fully engaged. They're just kind of coasting. And they're not really thinking through the difficult decisions that need to be made. They're just kind of showing up and getting a paycheck. And that's the way it is for a lot of organizations. But to be a powerful, impactful leader, you have to you have to make you have to invite the kinds of difficult questions and decisions that really move an organization into the future. Is that helpful?
Excellent. We have another great question from Tracy. Um, she wants to know, is there a way you can test the skill level of a leader's capability of handling conflict, or an
Ooh,
assessment that can be used to gauge the skill level of conflict resolution?
that is a great question. I am not aware of any. Is anyone in the group aware of an instrument that specifically measures your skill with handling conflict? I would guess that, I mean, in some ways, there are there are measures of emotional intelligence that would be tied to this, but I would love to see that. Clifton Strengths. Yeah. I'm always Thomas Kilman. So Thomas Kilman, I'm not familiar with. I'm gonna have to look that up. I I personally am often uncomfortable with personality types because they can be the effect of the personality types can be rather closed mindset in the end. People label themselves with a type, and they don't see that personality is very contextual. They operate from very different personality types depending on the situation that they're in. And the context is actually the most important thing in determining how someone behaves. And as leaders, you have the ability to shape the context. And people can make choices, and personality can change over time. So yeah. Ooh, there's a great conflict management styles assessment. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Melissa. I hope you guys can capture that. The TKI instrument, Thomas Kidman instrument. Wonderful. So helpful. Tenor is a great tool to role play, measure, and provide feedback. Brilliant.
Yeah, I've heard of crucial conversations as well.
Yes, Crucial
I'm sh-
Conversations is I don't
yeah.
know if they have an instrument, but that's really
Mm.
the heart of the Crucial Conversations philosophy. And
Well,
they're wonderful stuff. I've read those books and they are awesome. So
great. Well, here's a question that's kind of relates to what we were just talking about. Um, Personality conflict. How do you navigate personality conflict when you have a peer, a leader, or an employee who has poor habits or behaviors that just rub people the wrong way, but they're not aware or they justify it?
yeah, do you call that out? I think is what you're saying. Do you? Um, in my experience, the right way to handle that is again to focus on the shared goals. And at the point that those personality conflicts are obviously interfering with the achievement of shared goals, that's the opportunity to have a conversation, either with the individual or with the um, or in a team context, to not call out the individual, but just to observe some patterns that are creating attacks. So someone mentioned neurodivergence earlier, and I worked with a manager once who he had Asperger's and Asperger's syndrome, and there were just some patterns that made it very difficult for a number of people to work with him. And what I learned in the context of that experience was that yes, he was in many ways unaware of the the issues that he was creating, and there was a certain degree to which some of those things were beyond his control. That's his brain was wired to work in specific ways. But becoming aware of specific examples of conflict, of things that were slowing down the organization, and presenting having a conversation about strategies that could help address those liabilities was in the end very useful. And it was really important for me to understand that this person had really solid good intent, that there wasn't any malice in the way that he was behaving. It was just kind of a byproduct of the way his brain worked. And so there was some accommodation, and there were some strategies set up to help us get to the shared goals, to help us hit the numbers that we needed to for that organization. Okay. Um, Wonderful. Asperger's isn't a diagnosis anymore. It was unscientific. It was created. Interesting. Autism spectrum disorder. Yeah, okay. So thank you for that clarification. So autism spectrum, it is a wide range, and like my son is on that spectrum, but he's much higher functioning than others. So, Lauren, thank you for that good point.
Here's one more. We have actually have a couple more, but this is about mediation skills. So do you have any additional resources that you recommend for training leaders in those mediation skills?
Um, to training leaders to be mediators, or resources for when you need a mediator outside the organization.
Yes,
Um,
to be mediators.
yeah. Um, I don't have, this is again one where I'm going to put it out to the group. If you have specific resources around mediation training, um, the foundation that I have comes uh, from some things that I've read and studied. For example, there's a book called Never Split the Difference, which is about mediation in high stakes. And there are some very specific techniques that you can learn in mediating situations. Most of the training that I'm familiar with is more focused on just some foundational concepts, some of the ones that we've talked about here. those are the ones that are part of the leadership progress cycle. But for a resource specifically focused on mediation, I don't have one right now. Anything else? Never split the difference is probably the best to get real results that I've seen. So Trina, yeah. Um, it is hard for the leader to be the mediator as the challenge of power distance. Yes. So yeah, and I've had that situation where someone that was part of my organization felt like they were in conflict with me. And one of the most important things that I needed to do to address that situation was to defer to a third party mediator so that the employee felt like the the their perspective was accurately addressed. Okay, the mediation process, practical strategies for resolving conflict, excellent. And then the mediatorcertification.org. Interesting. Yeah. Thank you, Vicky and Tracy. And Amy Ryan, I find essential facilitation from Interaction Associates to be the best training I've taken in this area. Brilliant. I hope everyone will have access to the chat afterwards, Emma.
Yeah, I think we'll make sure to include it this time because there's so many great links and resources in there. So y'all can expect that to be included in the follow-up email that you'll receive later today.
Yeah, super productive.
This is great. All right, we have time for like one or two more questions. We talked about psychological safety, but what are some specific steps you've seen work in helping teams shift from conflict avoidant to conflict healthy?
Yeah. So specific, interestingly, one of the things that seems to make a difference in my experience is just some simple team building informal interaction that creates a space for people to have a relationship upon which to base some healthy disagreement. Ultimately, I believe that healthy conflict has to rest on a foundation of trust. I recently read again Stephen M. R. Covey's book about trust and the things that produce trust and the things that detract from it. It's something worth studying. It has to do with things like character and track record and competence. But when you have a relationship, even though people are fallible and human, a real relationship helps to create a context for trust. And I think the single most important thing is having a leader that's intentional about inviting conversation and dialogue, making it safe. When there isn't any disagreement, playing devil's advocate a little bit, and inviting people to and when people do contradict or raise challenging questions, overtly thanking them for doing that. That those leadership habits are the biggest thing. Awesome. The best. Oh, Speed of Trust. Trust and Inspire. Yeah, both of those by Stephen M. R. Covey. Love both of them. They really are very useful. Some people use anger, stress, fear to get what they want, and giving into emotional manipulation sets the foundation for workplace conflict. Yes. Yeah. How can we avoid this as leadership, learning and development leaders? Good question. If you have someone that is manipulative, it's important to recognize that. It's important not to reward it. And if it's ongoing, it warrants a performance improvement plan. I have an employee that was using very manipulative techniques. And so we did ultimately create a performance improvement plan specifically around that. And we had to document specific kinds of interactions and explain what was unacceptable and what improved performance would look like. And I'm happy to report that that did make a difference in that case. It doesn't always. And in those cases where it doesn't, then you have to make a hard decision. And for the sake of the organization, even a high performer needs to be let go if they're creating a toxic environment. All right. I think that's it. Anything else, Emma, that
That's it. We're out of time. You're getting tons of kudos and thank yous
thank
in
you,
the
everyone.
chats. It's been a really fabulous session. I love to see what can happen when we all get together and share our insights. And it's great to have an expert
Sure.
like you on, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, y'all. That's it for this session. We're going to be taking a 15-minute break, and up next we have Scott Province joining us from ELB Learning. His session is titled Beyond the Blueprint, Transform Change Management with Behavioral Science. In just a few seconds, I'm going to close out this session, and I hope y'all stick around for our next session. Again, that begins at the top of the hour. You can join it by returning to the event lobby and going to the Sessions tab. Thanks again, everybody.